The year is 479 BC, and the air over the rocky shores near Plataea hangs heavy with the stench of blood and sweat. The sun beats down mercilessly on a jagged landscape scarred by war, where the echoes of clashing bronze and desperate cries still linger after the Greeks' brutal triumph over the Persian invaders. Among the dust and debris, a young Scythian boy, barely 14, stumbles forward, his wrists bound by coarse rope that bites into his flesh. His name was once Chiron, a name whispered by his mother under the vast steppes of his homeland, but that name is already slipping away, soon to be erased by the will of his captors. His bare feet drag across sharp stones, each step a searing pain, while the jeers of Athenian soldiers surround him like a pack of wolves. His heart pounds in his chest, not just from exhaustion, but from the suffocating dread of what awaits. Death would have been a mercy. In the aftermath of the Greco-Persian Wars, as recorded by Herodotus in his histories, the victors did not merely claim land or gold, they claimed bodies. The Greeks, heralded as the cradle of democracy and philosophy, built their shining city-states on the backs of the defeated. Among the spoils of war were boys like Chiron, torn from barbarian tribes or distant lands, their youth and beauty a currency more valuable than coin in the markets of Athens. Archaeological findings, including inscriptions on pottery and legal tablets from the period, reveal the grim reality. These boys were not just slaves, but commodities in a system of intimate domination, stripped of freedom and forced into roles that would shatter their very sense of self. Chiron's journey began weeks ago, when his village was razed by Greek raiders seeking captives after the battle. The screams of his family still haunt him, mingling with the metallic tang of blood that coated his tongue as he was dragged away. Now as he's herded into a makeshift camp alongside other trembling boys, the air is thick with the sour reek of unwashed bodies and the faint, sickening sweetness of olive oil used to prepare them for inspection. His captors, hardened men with sun-scorched faces, bark orders in a tongue he doesn't understand, their laughter cutting deeper than any blade as they prod him with spear shafts. One soldier, his breath hot with wine, grabs Chiron's chin, forcing his head up to inspect his features, pale skin, sharp cheekbones, a body not yet hardened by manhood. "This one will fetch a fine price," the man growls, his grip a vice of possession. Chiron's stomach churns, his legs trembling beneath him as the reality sinks in. His body is no longer his own. The Greeks had a word for such boys, eromenos, a term that masked raw exploitation under the guise of mentorship or tradition. As Plato and other philosophers would later rationalize in their writings, these relationships were framed as educational, a noble exchange between an older man, the erased asterisk, and a youthful partner. But for Chiron, there is no nobility in the hunger he sees in the eyes of those who appraise him. There's only the suffocating weight of power, the unspoken rules of submission that will be carved into his soul. Historical accounts and laws from Athens, etched into stone and preserved for centuries, confirm that consent was never a consideration. These boys, often as young as 12, were inspected like livestock in public markets, their worth tied to their physical allure and their ability to endure. To resist meant death or worse, abandonment to brothels regulated by the state, where survival came at the cost of dignity. As night falls over the camp, Chiron is shoved into a cramped tent, the air inside thick with the musk of fear and despair. Beside him, another boy, renamed Theron by their captors, whispers in broken words of his own capture from a Thracian tribe. Theron's eyes are hollow, his voice barely a breath as he recounts the March days without food, chains so tight they left raw, weeping sores, and the constant threat of violence for any sign of defiance. Chiron feels the boy's trembling hand brush against his, a fleeting moment of shared anguish, but there is no comfort here. Outside, the soldiers' laughter grows louder, mingled with the clink of amphorae and the crackle of a fire. Chiron's chest tightens as he hears footsteps approaching, the heavy tread of a man who has already claimed his fate with a single, appraising glance. The tent flap opens, and the flickering torchlight reveals a figure whose silhouette promises not guidance, but subjugation. This is only the beginning. The horrors awaiting Karen and countless others are not just physical, but psychological, a deliberate unraveling of identity. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were. In the coming days, he will be marched to Athens, sold in a market where his name will be stripped away, replaced with a Greek one to sever ties to his past. He will be bathed and oiled, not for care, but for display, taught to bow and obey in ways that will haunt his every thought. The Greeks' obsession with status and citizenship, so celebrated in their agora, casts a dark shadow over those deemed unworthy of freedom. For Chiron, freedom is already a distant memory, replaced by a creeping dread that seeps into his bones. What lessons can we draw from such intimate oppressions, buried beneath the marble columns of a glorified past? The Greeks' ideal of beauty and knowledge came at a cost paid by the silenced, their stories buried in the annals of history until now. This is a reminder that even the most revered societies harbor shadows of cruelty, where power distorts human connection into something unrecognizable. If this glimpse into the abyss has shaken you, subscribe to the channel for more forgotten truths. The darkest corners of history are waiting to be uncovered, and Chiron's story is far from over. The sun has barely risen over the dusty plains outside Athens, and already the air is thick with the clamor of a makeshift market. It is 479 BC, just weeks after the brutal victory at Plataea, and the spoils of war are being sorted like grain in a harvest. Among them is Chiron, the young Scythian boy whose name already feels like a ghost on his tongue. His bare feet, caked with dirt and blood from the long march, shuffle across the uneven ground as he's pushed into a line of other captives. The scent of sweat and fear mingles with the sharp tang of olive oil smeared on their skin by rough hands, a grotesque preparation for what lies ahead. His chest heaves, each breath a struggle against the rope binding his wrists, while the shouts of merchants and the clinking of coins create a cacophony that drowns out his racing thoughts. He is no longer a son, a brother, a boy from the steppes. He is a commodity, inspected and priced under the unrelenting Greek sun. The market is a theater of degradation, a place where the victors parade their dominance over the defeated. Historical records, including legal inscriptions from Athens preserved on stone tablets, paint a chilling picture of these transactions. Boys like Chiron, often captured in war or sold by desperate families from barbarian lands, were evaluated not for their strength or skill, but for their youth and beauty. Their bodies were poked and prodded, their faces turned this way and that by calloused hands, as men with cold, calculating eyes murmured their worth. Chiron feels the weight of those gazes now, each one stripping away another layer of who he once was. A burly Athenian, his breath sour with wine, grips Chiron's arm, forcing him to stand straighter. "Look at those eyes," the man sneers to a companion, his voice dripping with possession. "Wild but tameable. He'll do well for the right master." Chiron's stomach twists, a sickening heat creeping up his throat as laughter cruel and guttural rings out around him. Death would have been a mercy compared to this slow unraveling of his soul. Beside him, another boy, Theron, stands trembling, his Thracian features marred by a fresh bruise across his cheek. Theron's eyes meet Chiron's for a fleeting moment, a silent plea for something neither can give: escape, comfort, anything to dull the dread. Theron whispers, his voice barely audible over the din, "They took my name first. They'll take everything else soon." Chiron feels the words like a blade, sharp and cold, slicing through the fragile remnants of his hope. He remembers the stories his mother told of warriors who died fighting, their names carried on the wind. But here, there's no honor, no wind to carry anything. Only the suffocating weight of being seen as less than human, a vessel for desires he cannot fathom. The air grows heavier as a new figure approaches, an older man draped in a fine chiton, his demeanor polished but his eyes predatory. Chiron's skin prickles, every instinct screaming to flee, but the ropes and the crowd hold him fast. This is the second stage of their torment. the auction, where their fates are sealed with a handful of drachmas. As documented by Herodotus and later Athenian laws, these boys were often sold into the households of aristocrats as *eromenoi*, a term that cloaked exploitation in the guise of mentorship. The cultural obsession with power and masculinity dictated that the older man, the *erased*, maintained dominance, while the younger was molded into subservience, a dynamic that had nothing to do with choice and everything to do with control. Chiron watches as Theron is dragged forward, a price shouted out like a butcher naming the cost of meat. The boy's shoulders slump, his body visibly shaking under the scrutiny, as the fine-robed man nods with a faint, satisfied smirk. Chiron's turn comes next, and as hands shove him forward, he feels the ground tilt beneath him, the world narrowing to the leering faces and the suffocating realization that his body is no longer his own. The psychological horror of this moment is as brutal as any physical pain. The Greeks, so celebrated for their philosophy and democracy, built their ideals on a foundation of exclusion and subjugation. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were, and for Chiron, that erasure begins here, in the dust of a market where his past is bartered away. His memories of the steppes, of his mother's lullabies, are drowned out by the barked commands of his new reality. The man who buys him, a wealthy Athenian named Lysandros, inspects him with a gaze that feels like a brand, searing ownership into Chiron's very bones. The boy's legs buckle, but a sharp tug on the rope forces him upright, his humiliation laid bare for all to see. The scent of incense from a nearby stall mixes with the acrid stench of unwashed bodies, a nauseating blend that mirrors the chaos in his mind. As he's led away, Chiron catches one last glimpse of Theron, now a shadow of the boy who whispered to him moments ago. Their paths diverge, but their shared anguish lingers in the air like a curse. For Chiron, the journey into Athens promises not just servitude, but a deeper violation, a forced assimilation that will strip him of his language, his gods, his name. Historical accounts reveal that such boys were often renamed with Greek titles, their cultural identities scrubbed clean to fit the mold of their captors' desires. The trembling in Chiron's hands isn't just from exhaustion. It's from the creeping terror of losing himself entirely. The laughter of Lysandros, low and possessive, echoes in his ears as they move through the crowd, each step a descent into a darkness that no sunlight can pierce. This is not the end, but merely the sharpening of the blade that will carve away Chiron's essence. The horrors of capture are giving way to the horrors of ownership, where every glance, every touch, will be a reminder of his powerlessness. The Greeks' reverence for freedom and citizenship casts a long, cruel shadow over those deemed unworthy, and Chiron is only beginning to feel its weight. The gates of Athens loom like the jaws of a beast as Chiron is dragged through them, the city's marble and dust a stark contrast to the endless steppes of his lost homeland. It is still 479 BC, and the air here is heavy with the scent of burning incense from nearby temples, mingling with the sour tang of sweat and the metallic bite of fear that clings to his skin. His wrists, raw from the coarse rope that binds them, ache with every step, but the pain is nothing compared to the suffocating dread coiling in his chest. The streets buzz with life merchants haggling, philosophers debating under shaded porticos, citizens draped in fine chitons, but to Chiron, it is a blur of alien sounds and hostile faces. He is a ghost among the living, a boy whose name is already fading, soon to be replaced by whatever his new master Lysandros deems fit. The cobblestones beneath his bruised feet feel like knives, each step a reminder of his captivity, while the low, possessive chuckle of Lysandros behind him cuts deeper than any blade. This is the third stage of Chiron's descent, the breaking of his spirit through forced assimilation. Historical records, including legal tablets from Athens and accounts by later writers like Plato, reveal the chilling precision of this process. Boys like Chiron, captured from barbarian lands or sold into servitude, were not merely enslaved, they were remade. Their languages, their gods, their very identities were stripped away in a deliberate act of cultural erasure. designed to mold them into obedient shadows of Greek ideals. For Chiron, this begins in a dimly lit courtyard within Lysandro's sprawling estate, where the air is thick with the scent of olive oil and the faint, cloying sweetness of wine. He is shoved to his knees, the stone cold against his skin, as rough hands tear away the tattered remnants of his Scythian garb. The humiliation burns hotter than the sun overhead, his body trembling not just from the chill but from the invasive stares of Lysandro's household servants, guards, and the man himself, whose eyes gleam with a hunger that makes Chiron's stomach churn. A woman, her face hard and unfeeling, approaches with a basin of water and a cloth. She is a slave herself, her own story of loss etched into the lines of her face, but there is no kinship in her touch as she begins to scrub Chiron's skin raw. The water is frigid, each stroke a violation, stripping away the dirt of his journey, and with it, the last traces of who he was. "You'll be called Alcides now," Lysandros declares, his voice smooth but laced with iron, as if naming a prized hound. The name, a Greek one, meaning strength, feels like a shackle, heavier than the ropes that still bind him. Chiron's throat tightens, a silent scream trapped within him as he feels the ghost of his true name, Chiron, slip further into the void. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were, and in this moment, he can feel the erasure seeping into his bones like poison. The psychological torment is relentless, a blade sharper than any physical wound. As documented in Athenian laws preserved on stone inscriptions, consent was an alien concept in these dynamics. Boys like Chiron, often as young as 12 or 14, were trained for subservience in ways that shattered their sense of self. Lysandros circles him now, his presence a suffocating weight, as he murmurs instructions in a tone that drips with false benevolence. "You will learn our ways, our tongue, our gods," he says, his hand resting on Chiron's shoulder with a grip that promises ownership. "You will serve, and in serving, you will be elevated." The words are a lie, a twisted mockery of care, and Chiron feels the tremor in his body deepen, his breath shallow as the man's fingers linger too long. A silent assertion of dominance that needs no further explanation. The air grows heavier, the scent of incense from a household altar mixing with the musk of fear, creating a nauseating haze that mirrors the chaos in his mind. A memory flashes unbidden, his mother's voice, soft and lilting under the vast Scythian sky, teaching him the names of their ancestors. That memory is a lifeline, but it frays with each passing moment as Lysandro's household begins its work of remaking him. Another slave, a boy not much older than Chiron, approaches under orders to teach him the first words of Greek. His name is Phaedo, and his eyes are hollow, his voice flat as he recites phrases of obedience, words that Chiron must repeat until they replace the rhythms of his native tongue. Phaedo's hands shake as he corrects Chiron's pronunciation, a shared anguish passing between them in fleeting glances, but there is no rebellion here, only survival. The laughter of Lysandro's guests, gathered in a nearby room for a symposium, filters through the walls cruel, carefree, a reminder of the power that looms over them both. Chiron's chest tightens, the weight of his new name and new language pressing down like a stone, crushing the boy he once was. This forced integration is not just a loss of identity. It is a violation of the soul, a slow unraveling designed to leave nothing of the original behind. Historical accounts from the period, including pottery inscriptions depicting such relationships, show that the Greeks framed this as mentorship, a noble exchange between *erased* and *eramenos*. But for Chiron, there is no nobility in the way Lysandros' gaze strips him bare, no honor in the lessons that await lessons of submission, of bending until he breaks. The trembling in his limbs is not just fear. It is the creeping realization that resistance will only bring worse horrors. Death would have been a mercy compared to this deliberate destruction of self, where every word, every touch, is a step closer to oblivion. As night falls over the estate, Chiron is left alone in a small windowless room, the air stale and suffocating. The sounds of the symposium grow louder, The clink of cups and the murmur of drunken voices a constant reminder of his powerlessness. He curls into himself, his body aching from the day's indignities, and whispers his true name Karen into the darkness, a desperate attempt to hold on to something that is already slipping away. But the walls of this new world close in, and the laughter outside grows sharper, a promise of torments yet to come. The Greeks built their shining city on ideals of freedom, yet for those like Karen, freedom is a myth, replaced by a cage of flesh and expectation. His story, like so many others, is a shadow beneath the marble, a truth buried by history's triumphant narrative but not forgotten, not yet. The flickering light of a single oil lamp casts jagged shadows across the stone walls of the small, airless room where Karen, now forced to answer to Alcides, huddles in the oppressive silence of night. It is still 479 BC, and the grand estate of Lysandros, in the heart of Athens, hums with the distant echoes of a symposium, the clinking of cups and bursts of raucous laughter seeping through the walls like a poison. The air inside is stale, thick with the lingering scent of olive oil used to anoint his skin earlier that day, now mixed with the acrid tang of his own fierce sweat. His body aches, not just from the bruises and scrapes of his long journey, but from the deeper, invisible wounds of the day's relentless humiliations. His knees, still raw from being forced to the ground, tremble as he presses himself into the corner, as if the cold stone might shield him from the reality closing in. But there is no escape, not from the weight of his new name, nor from the predatory gaze of Lysandros that haunts his every thought. Death would have been a mercy compared to this slow, deliberate unraveling of his soul. This is the fourth stage of Karen's torment, the training, a calculated process of breaking and remolding that strips away the last vestiges of his autonomy. Historical accounts, including references in Athenian legal texts and dialogues, attributed to philosophers like Plato, reveal the chilling normalcy of such practices among the elite. Boys like Karen, often torn from their homelands after wars documented by Herodotus, were not just possessions, they were projects, shaped into ideals of subservience under the guise of cultural elevation. In Lysandros' household, this begins with a regimen as precise as it is cruel. Each morning, Karen is dragged from his cramped cell to a sunlit courtyard, the air heavy with the scent of myrrh from a nearby altar, a bitter contrast to the brutality that awaits. There, under the watchful eyes of Lysandros and his favored retainers, he is taught to walk, speak, and even stand in ways that erase his Scythian roots. His every movement is corrected with sharp words or sharper blows, each strike a reminder that his body is no longer his own. The laughter of the onlookers low, mocking, and cruel cuts deeper than any lash, their amusement a blade that carves away at his dignity. The psychological horror of this training is a suffocating fog, thicker than the incense that clogs the air during these sessions. Karen's mind reels as he is forced to recite phrases of deference in a language that feels like chains on his tongue. "Yes, master," he must say, the words tasting of ash. While Lysandros nods with a smile that is all teeth, his hand resting too long on Karen's shoulder, a gesture laden with unspoken intent. The man's touch sends a shiver through Karen's frame, a visceral dread that coils in his gut like a serpent. Historical inscriptions on pottery and stone tablets from the period confirm that such dynamics were not about mutual bond but raw domination, where the asterisk erased asterisk wielded power over the asterisk Iraminos asterisk in every sphere, physical, emotional, intimate. Consent was a myth. Survival meant submission, and Karen feels the weight of that truth in every forced bow, every averted gaze. His hands tremble as he pours wine for Lysandros during a private meal, the clink of the amphora against the cup a deafening sound in the suffocating quiet, while the man's eyes linger with a hunger that needs no words. A fleeting memory of the steps pierces through the haze riding with his older brother under an endless sky, the wind carrying the scent of wild grass and freedom. That memory is a wound now, raw and bleeding, as Lysandros' voice cuts through it with a command to kneel. Karen's knees hit the stone, the impact jarring his already aching body, and he feels the last threads of his past fray under the weight of this new reality. Beside him, another boy, Fado, who has endured this hell longer, offers no comfort, only a hollow stare as he mutters lessons in Greek etiquette. Fado's voice is flat, his own spirit long since shattered, and Chiron sees his future in those empty eyes, a shell of a person, remade into something unrecognizable. The air grows heavier as Lysandros approaches, his presence a storm cloud, and murmurs words of guidance that drip with false warmth. "You will be refined, Alcides," he says, the name a branding iron on Chiron's soul. "You will serve with grace." The boy's stomach twists, the scent of the man's perfumed oil mixing with the musk of the room, a nauseating blend that mirrors the violation of every boundary he once held. This training is not just about obedience. It is about erasure, a deliberate stripping away of identity until nothing remains of the boy who once was. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were. And Chiron feels that erasure in every forced gesture, every stolen glance that demands submission. The Greeks, so celebrated for their ideals of beauty and wisdom, built their world on the silenced suffering of those deemed lesser, as evidenced by laws etched into stone that offered no protection to boys like him. His trembling is not just fear, it is the creeping realization that each day brings him closer to losing himself entirely. The laughter from the symposium beyond the walls grows louder, a cruel reminder of the power that surrounds him, a power that sees his body as a tool, a vessel, a thing to be shaped and consumed. As the lamp's flame gutters low, Chiron curls tighter into himself, whispering his true name into the darkness. Chiron, a desperate chant against the void. But the walls of Lysandros' estate seem to swallow the sound, and the weight of Alcides presses heavier, a shackle no rope could match. The horrors of capture, auction, and assimilation have led to this, a battle for his very soul, fought in silence, under the gaze of a master whose every word is a weapon. The Greeks' obsession with status and citizenship casts a shadow darker than any battlefield, and Chiron is drowning in it, his past slipping through his fingers like sand. The night stretches on, and with it, the promise of tomorrow's torments, each one a step closer to a breaking point he cannot yet fathom. The pale light of dawn creeps through the narrow slits of Lysandros' estate, casting cold gray streaks across the stone floor where Chiron, now branded as Alcides lies, curled in a corner of his cramped cell. It is still 479 BC, and the air within these walls is suffocating, laden with the lingering musk of fear and the faint, bitter residue of extinguished oil lamps. His body aches from the endless drills of yesterday, each muscle screaming from the unnatural postures he's been forced to hold, each bruise a map of his degradation. The scent of myrrh from the household altar seeps into the room, a cruel mockery of sanctity, blending with the sour tongue of his own unwashed skin. Outside, the city of Athens stirs with the hum of morning commerce and philosophy. But here, in this shadowed prison, time is measured only by the dread of what comes next. Chiron's chest tightens, his breath shallow, as the echo of Lysandros' footsteps approaches, a sound that has become a harbinger of violation. Death would have been a mercy compared to this final soul-crushing stage of his torment. This is the culmination of Chiron's descent, the complete erasure of self through unrelenting subjugation. Historical records, etched into Athenian stone tablets and whispered through the accounts of Herodotus, lay bare the grim truth of this process. Boys like Chiron, wrested from their homelands in the aftermath of wars like Plataea, were not merely broken, they were obliterated. Their identities dissolved into the desires of their captors. In Lysandros' household, this final act unfolds with a chilling precision that strips away even the smallest remnants of resistance. Chiron is summoned to the central hall, the polished marble cold against his bare feet, each step a shuddering reminder of his powerlessness. The air here is thick with the scent of wine and perfumed oil, a nauseating haze that mirrors the fog in his mind as Lysandros stands before him, draped in a fine chiton, his gaze a blade that cuts through flesh and spirit alike. Today, Alkides, you become one of us, he declares, his voice smooth but laced with iron, a promise of ownership that needs no further explanation. The ritual of erasure is both physical and psychological, a deliberate desecration of everything Karen once was. Lissandro's retainers gather, their eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and cruelty, as Karen is forced to kneel before a small altar dedicated to Apollo, the god of order and beauty, a bitter irony. His trembling hands are guided to pour a libation, the wine spilling over his fingers like blood. While Lissandros recites words of initiation in a tongue that still feels like thorns in Chiron's mouth. Historical inscriptions from the period reveal that such acts were framed as elevation, a twisted rite of passage for an *Ereminos*, under the guise of mentorship. But there is no honor here, only the suffocating weight of domination as Lissandro's hand rests on Karen's neck, a grip that asserts control over body and soul. The boy's skin crawls, his stomach churning with a dread so visceral it feels like it might split him apart, while the low chuckles of the onlookers echo like a chorus of demons in the cavernous hall. The true horror lies not just in the act, but in the loss it represents. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were, and Chiron feels that erasure now, seeping into his very bones, as Lissandros renames his past with every forced gesture. A memory of his mother's face, framed by the endless Scythian sky, flickers in his mind, a lifeline that frays under the weight of this new reality. He clings to the name Chiron in the silence of his thoughts, but even that is drowned out by the barked commands and the invasive touches that follow, each one a hammer blow to his fracturing identity. Another boy, Fido, stands nearby, his hollow eyes averted, a living testament to the end of this road, a shell where a person once stood. Chiron feels the tremor in his own limbs deepen, not just from exhaustion, but from the creeping realization that he, too, is becoming a ghost, a shadow shaped by hands that see him as nothing more than clay. The Greeks, so revered for their marble temples and lofty ideals, built their shining world on the silenced agony of those like Chiron. Legal texts from Athens, preserved through centuries, confirm that boys in his position had no protections, their bodies commodities to be consumed and discarded when their youth faded. The air grows heavier as Lissandro's voice weaves false promises of belonging, his touch lingering with a possessiveness that strips away the last vestiges of Chiron's autonomy. The scent of incense and sweat becomes a suffocating shroud, a sensory cage as tight as the invisible chains that bind him. The laughter of the household swells, cruel and careless, a reminder of the power that looms over every moment of his existence, a power that sees no shame in reshaping a boy into a tool for pleasure and status. As the day drags on, Chiron is led back to his cell, his body and mind numbed by the weight of what has been taken. He whispers his true name into the darkness, Chiron, Chiron, a desperate plea to hold on to something, anything, of who he was. But the walls seem to swallow the sound, and the name Alkides echoes in its place, a brand seared into his soul. The Greeks' obsession with citizenship and freedom casts a shadow darker than any battlefield, a shadow in which Chiron is lost, his story buried beneath the triumphant narratives of history. Yet, beneath the marble and the myth, his pain lingers, a testament to the intimate horrors endured by countless others, unseen by the Agra's light. What can we learn from such a brutal erasure, from a society that cloaked exploitation in the guise of culture? Chiron's suffering is a mirror to the darkest impulses of power, a reminder that even the most celebrated civilizations harbor abysses of cruelty. It speaks to oppressions that echo through time, patriarchal dominance, cultural annihilation, the commodification of bodies that still scar our world today. We must look into these shadows, not to revel in their horror, but to understand the cost of silence, the weight of forgotten voices. If this story of intimate devastation has shaken you, if it has clawed at the edges of your comfort, then subscribe to the channel for more forgotten truths. The darkest corners of history are still waiting to be uncovered, and Chiron's silent scream demands to be heard.